Everyone saw the garage door rising, but nobody expected what came next. The sunlight hit the polished chrome like fire, bouncing across the driveway, reflecting off paint so deep it looked like midnight bottled in steel. And then, before I could even take a breath, a scream split the air. "That man just stole my car! Call 911!" For a second, I thought maybe someone was joking. But Beverly Lang, president of our HOA and self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, wasn't the kind of woman who joked. She came charging across her pristine lawn in heels, phone pressed to her ear, blonde bob gleaming like a helmet. And as she pointed at me, keys still dangling in my hand, I realized the police sirens in the distance were real. How do you prove you're not a thief when the very thing you're accused of stealing is your own? That was the question I was about to face. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 6 months ago I walked away from a career in aerospace engineering to chase something I thought would bring me closer to my father. A dream built from grease, chrome, and memory. My dad was a street racing mechanic, the kind of man who could tell you a car's soul just by listening to the engine idle. He died when I was 15. But before he passed, he started restoring a 1968 Shelby GT500 Eleanor. To anyone else, it was just a muscle car. To me, it was the last unfinished sentence in his story. 2 years of my life had gone into that car. 2 years of late nights, busted knuckles, parts scavenged from swap meets and junkyards. Each bolt turned like a conversation with a ghost. And that morning, when I hit the remote and watched the garage door climb, I wasn't just looking at steel and horsepower. I was looking at my father's voice, finally whole again. But Beverly didn't see memory or legacy. She saw possession. The cruisers screeched to a stop, blue lights washing across manicured hedges. Officer Rodriguez stepped out first, stocky, weary eyes, the look of a man who's seen too many suburban disputes escalate into absurdity. His partner began photographing my car as Beverly shoved papers into his hands. "Thank God you're here," she wailed, every syllable sharpened into glass. "This man stole my vehicle. I have the bill of sale. My client in Nevada purchased this car from me last week for $75,000. That Shelby is mine." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was so outrageous it short-circuited my fear. Rodriguez looked at me, then at Beverly, then back at me. "Sir, do you have documentation for this vehicle?" I handed him everything: title, registration, insurance. My name. My address. The car I'd inherited, rebuilt, lived with. But Beverly wasn't bluffing. She had papers, too, forged or fabricated, but convincing at first glance. And that's when it hit me. She hadn't just accused me. She'd planned. This. "Mr. Miller," Rodriguez said carefully, "this is unusual. You say the car is yours, but the lady has paperwork showing she sold it. Can you prove continuous possession?" I smiled, not because I was calm, but because I was angry. My father had been paranoid about car theft back in his racing days. He'd carved more than horsepower into that Shelby. He'd carved proof. I said. "Check under the hood." Beverly's expression twitched. For the first time, her confidence faltered. Rodriguez lifted the hood, and there it was. D. Miller, 1995. Etched into the engine block in my father's careful script. Alongside the address of our old house, permanent, irrefutable. Beverly's face went pale, then flushed crimson. She stammered something about confusion, about paperwork errors, but the words cracked as they left her lips. Rodriguez exhaled, closing his notebook. "Ma'am, we'll need more documentation from you. For now, this appears to be Mr. Miller's vehicle." The police began packing up, but Beverly wasn't finished. She jabbed her finger at me like it was a weapon. "Fine, but this isn't over. I'm calling my lawyer, and I'm calling Harold." Her voice shook when she said that name, but it wasn't fear. It was confidence, like she believed Harold was a trump card that would crush me flat. The cruisers pulled away. Beverly stormed back into her house, but as I stood in my driveway, the Shelby's engine ticking softly as it cooled, I noticed something she hadn't hidden well enough. Her eyes, just before the hood was lifted, had darted upward, toward the tree line, and there, small, silent, hovering like a mechanical hornet, was a drone, watching. That's when I knew this wasn't just a petty HOA vendetta. It was something bigger. Someone had been studying my car, memorizing its specifications, learning details only I should have known, and Beverly, she wasn't working alone. Why would anyone call 911 with paperwork they knew was fake? That was the question echoing in my head the morning after Beverly tried to have me arrested for stealing my own car. Normal people don't fabricate bills of sale. Normal people don't know the exact gear ratio of an engine they've never touched. Beverly's obsession wasn't about grass height or noise ordinances anymore. It was about something deeper, more dangerous, and that's why I made a choice that would look insane to anyone else. I called the city impound lot and told them to take the Shelby. Emily nearly dropped her coffee when I told her. My sister had always been the practical one, the lawyer in training who believed in systems and paperwork, while I believed in grease-stained tools and instinct. At 28, she was finishing law school, and I could hear her tapping her pen against her desk through the phone. "Ethan, are you out of your mind? You've spent 2 years restoring that car, and now you're just going to hand it over to storage?" "I'm not handing it over," I told her. "I'm hiding it, in plain sight." Silence stretched across the line, then her sigh. "Okay, explain." "Beverly wants me to fight this on my driveway under her rules. She wants to keep me cornered, keep me reacting. If I move the Shelby to city storage, it's secure, monitored. She can't just walk over with fake papers and a clipboard. And while she thinks she's winning, I'll be watching." What I didn't tell Emily was that Dad had installed something long ago that Beverly would never find. A backup GPS system, hidden deep in the engine compartment, invisible unless you knew where to look. And before the tow truck hauled it away, I slipped a second tracker under the rear bumper. Small, unnoticeable. My insurance policy. Emily's voice softened, though her lawyer brain still resisted. "You're setting a trap." "Exactly. But I need your help." That night, we spread papers across her kitchen table until the wood disappeared beneath them. Beverly's Facebook was a gold mine. Designer handbags, 5-star restaurants, luxury car auctions in states she had no reason to visit. For an HOA president with no visible income stream, her lifestyle didn't add up. Emily dug deeper. She found Beverly's old employment records, her debts, her business connections. And one name kept surfacing like oil on water: Harold Green, the chairman of the city council, a man who owned a real estate firm called Green and Associates, a man with political weight heavy enough to tilt the ground beneath him. "Look at this," Emily whispered, sliding property records toward me. "Beverly worked for Harold years ago. She left under, let's say, bad circumstances. But she's still tied to him financially. Loans, partnerships, debt. Ethan, this isn't just her. She's part of something bigger." That's when I remembered the drone. The next morning, I checked the bushes along my driveway. And there it was, a listening device, no bigger than a pack of gum, positioned perfectly to capture every word spoken near the garage. Cheap enough to buy online, but sophisticated enough to feed someone a constant drip of my private conversations. That explained how Beverly had known so much about the Shelby. My parts orders, my calls to suppliers, even the custom exhaust I'd installed last month. She'd been listening to everything, but if she was desperate, it was because desperation had teeth. Emily discovered that Beverly owed nearly $200,000 to creditors. Some of those debts traced to a shadowy company called International Auto Ventures, a firm specializing in overseas car sales. Suddenly, it all made sense. The fake paperwork, the obsession with the Shelby. Beverly wasn't trying to punish me. She was trying to cash out, and she wasn't alone. That night, My GPS tracker sent its first alert. The Shelby was moving. My heart hammered as I pulled up the app. The car wasn't at the impound lot. The signal pulsed from a warehouse district 20 miles out of town. The pin settled on a building called Westside Storage Solutions, a place I'd never heard of. I called the impound lot in the morning, demanding answers. They swore the Shelby was still in their custody, which meant one thing. Beverly's operation was more sophisticated than I'd imagined. Either she had access to duplicate vehicles, or she had inside connections that reached into the city's own secure facilities. I didn't know which. Possibility chilled me more. Later that evening, there was a knock on my door. Marcus Rodriguez, my retired neighbor, stood there. He was a quiet man, kept to himself, but his eyes carried weight, the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "Ethan," he said, lowering his voice, "I couldn't help but notice the commotion yesterday, and I think you should know something about Beverly and Harold Green." He sat at my table, folding his weathered hands. "Last year, Harold came by my house 3 times, said he was just being friendly. But all his questions were about my vintage motorcycle collection. A week later, Beverly started citing me for violations I'd never even heard of. It felt coordinated, like they were setting me up for something." I leaned back, chills crawling my arms. Marcus wasn't paranoid. He was describing the same pattern Emily and I had just uncovered. Beverly wasn't a rogue neighbor drunk on HOA power. She was part of an organized system, a machine that targeted valuable possessions, using HOA rules as a weapon. I stared at the GPS coordinates on my phone, that blinking dot marking where my Shelby had been taken. This wasn't about a car anymore. This was about control, about power, about secrets that stretched back further than I realized. And if Beverly thought I was going to walk away quietly, she was about to learn what happens when an engineer starts solving a problem. Because this time, I wasn't just fighting for a car, I was fighting for the truth. Everyone expected me to let it go. That was the unspoken rule of suburban living. Keep your head down, mow your lawn, and don't make waves. But the night I stared at that blinking GPS signal, pulsing from a warehouse I'd never heard of, I realized the choice was gone. Either I fought, or I lost everything my father left behind. Emily arrived at my house the next morning carrying a cardboard box from the attic. "Couldn't sleep," she said, dropping it on the kitchen table. So I pulled down Dad's old files. Something about Harold's name. It's been gnawing at me. The box smelled like dust and motor oil, like a time capsule from another life. We spilled its contents across the table. Yellowing newsletters, handwritten notes, photographs. And buried in the stack was a group photo from a 1995 company picnic. There was Dad, grinning, a wrench in his pocket. And right next to him, a younger Harold Green, identified in the caption as Quality Assurance Manager. Emily's face went pale. "Ethan." Dad knew him. My throat tightened. All this time I thought Harold was just some political shark circling Beverly's schemes. But if he knew my father 30 years ago, this wasn't random. Marcus joined us later that day. He moved like a man who'd carried secrets for too long, slow and deliberate. "The key is patience," he said, checking the batteries on an old telephoto camera. "People like Beverly, they live by routines, and routines create openings." So at 6 a.m., the 3 of us sat in my truck, coffee steaming in the cup holders, parked across from Beverly's house. Right on schedule, 7:30 sharp, her white BMW pulled out of the driveway. We followed at a distance, Marcus whispering lessons, in surveillance like a professor of shadows. "Stay 2 cars back. If she changes lanes twice, you change once. Blend in. Don't look eager." We trailed her across town, heartbeats rising with every turn, until she pulled into a gated warehouse complex, Westside Storage Solutions. The same coordinates my GPS tracker had pinged. Through the chain-link fence, the truth hit like a gut. Punch. Row after row of classic cars gleamed under industrial lights. Vehicles too familiar, too specific to be coincidence. A '67 Mustang that looked exactly like the one I'd seen in Mrs. Patterson's garage. A Harley-Davidson that matched Marcus' missing bike. And in the far corner, covered by a tarp but unmistakable in its silhouette, my Shelby. "This isn't just about your car," Marcus whispered, raising his camera. The shutter clicked softly. "This is systematic." Emily leaned closer to the fence, eyes wide. "They're stripping the whole neighborhood." We watched Beverly walk inside like she owned the place. Workers moved around her, rolling cars toward shipping crates, photographing, cataloging, not theft in the shadows. A business, an operation. Organized. Efficient. Later, back at Emily's apartment, she spread out her laptop, pulling up spreadsheets of Harold's real estate company. "Look at this pattern," she said, scrolling through transactions. 15 households in our neighborhood sold valuables through Green and Associates in the last 2 years. Always after Beverly hit them with violations. Always under market value. The coordination was too clean to be accidental. Jake Thompson, the neighborhood electrician, confirmed it. He showed up that evening, restless, guilt in his eyes. "Ethan, I need to tell you something. Last month, Beverly asked me to install new security cameras around the community areas. But the specs weren't normal. This was military-grade surveillance, long-range mics, vehicle trackers. I refused, but she's got someone else doing it now." Piece by piece, the puzzle sharpened. Harold researched, Beverly pressured. Residents cracked under the weight. And their treasures, cars, motorcycles, pianos, were funneled straight into Harold's empire. Mrs. Patterson proved it beyond doubt. The widow called me in tears that afternoon. "Ethan, dear, I don't know if this means anything, but Harold came by last month. He knew everything about my piano, its make, its modifications, even its purchase date. How could he know unless—" Her voice broke. "Unless he'd been watching her, just like he'd been watching me." By the time night fell, the three of us, me, Emily, and Marcus, were staring at a conspiracy bigger than our neighborhood. Beverly wasn't a power-drunk HOA tyrant. She was a cog in Harold's machine, but the worst part wasn't the theft, it was the betrayal. I kept glancing at that company photo of Dad and Harold, their shoulders touching, forced smiles frozen in time. Dad had died in what they'd called a racing accident. But now, staring at Harold's smug face in that photograph, a seed of doubt crept in. Had Harold been there then too? That night, the GPS on my Shelby activated again. The blinking. Dot moved from Westside Storage toward the shipping district near the port. I followed it in silence, Emily in the passenger seat, Marcus in back. We parked in the shadows overlooking the terminal and watched Beverly supervise workers loading crates onto a truck. My Shelby rolled into view under harsh floodlights. 2 years of sweat, memory, and love, reduced to a piece of inventory ready to be shipped overseas. Emily grabbed my arm. "We need to call someone. This is interstate, international, it's federal crime." But before she could dial, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered. "Hello, Ethan." The voice was calm, smooth, confident. "This is Harold Green. I think it's time we had a conversation about your father and some unfinished business from a long time ago." The line went dead. And in that silence, watching my father's car disappear into a shipping container, I knew the past wasn't buried. It was alive. And Harold Green had just invited me into it. The phone call ended, but Harold's voice lingered like smoke in my lungs. Calm, cold, too familiar. He hadn't just been watching me, he'd been waiting. And the mention of my father, it wasn't random. I sat in the dark, staring at the port lights flickering in the distance. My Shelby was inside a shipping crate, tagged and cataloged like a product on a shelf. But for the first time, I realized Harold wasn't after the car. The car was bait. Emily broke the silence. "Ethan." "What did he say?" I forced the words out. "He said this goes back to Dad." Her hand trembled against the dashboard. For years, Dad had been the unshakable figure in our memories, the man who built engines like symphonies and taught us that integrity mattered more than comfort. To hear Harold's name tied to him was like watching a foundation crack under your feet. Back home, I tore through the box of Dad's old papers again, and buried beneath insurance forms and engineering notes was a manila envelope marked Insurance Claims, 1995. Inside were reports Dad had filed about faulty aircraft. Components flagged for safety review. Every single one bore a signature, Harold Green, Quality Assurance. Emily's eyes widened as she scanned them. These were whistleblower reports. Dad was trying to stop defective parts from being cleared, and Harold signed them off anyway. But there was more. A letter Dad had written but never mailed, addressed to the FBI. His handwriting was steady, his words precise. "If something happens to me, I want my family to know I tried to do the right thing. Harold Green has threatened me. If I die under suspicious circumstances, he is responsible." The room felt colder. Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So Harold didn't just know your father. He tried to silence him. The idea of Dad's accident being anything but tore through me like broken glass. I'd built the Shelby to honor him, but maybe I'd been restoring evidence of a war he'd never finished." That night, Emily made a call I hadn't expected. When she returned, she wasn't alone. Rebecca Taylor introduced herself with a handshake. That was firm, clipped. A federal customs enforcement agent with eyes like searchlights, sharp, calculating, restless. "Your sister filled me in," she said, laying photos across the table. "We've been tracking similar theft operations in 3 states. High-value property, cars, antiques, instruments, funneled overseas through shell companies. Your Beverly Lang and Harold Green fit the profile perfectly." The photos were chilling. Shipping containers loaded with cars, grand pianos strapped for transport, crates labeled with foreign addresses. Each image was another life dismantled. "Here's the problem," Taylor continued. "Green's political. Connections give him cover. If we hit the port now without airtight evidence, it all gets tossed. We need to catch them in the act of exporting stolen property. And that means letting your Shelby get closer to the ship." The words made bile rise in my throat. Letting the car go was one thing. Watching it sail across the ocean was another. But Taylor's expression left no room for argument. "We set a trap," she said. "Let them believe they're winning. Document every step. And when they load that car onto a container, we move." It sounded simple. It felt impossible. The hours that followed crawled like years. Marcus brought surveillance gear. Long lenses, radios, night vision scopes from a past life as a private investigator. Emily typed notes furiously, cataloging everything. Beverly's debt trail, Harold's connections, the listening device we'd found, and me. I sat in the garage, staring at empty space where the Shelby used to sit. My hands itched for tools, for the familiar comfort of metal and oil. But all I had was silence, and Dad's ghost. Emily sat beside me, her voice soft. "You know, I used to think your obsession with that car was just nostalgia, but watching you fight these last few days, I realize it's not about the car at all." I looked at her. She smiled faintly. "It's about Dad, about his values, about refusing to let people like Harold decide what's theirs and what's ours." She was right. Eleanor, the Shelby, was more than a machine. She was the last word of a man who'd tried to stand up against corruption, and now, finishing his fight, had fallen to us. At 3 in the morning, Marcus's radio crackled, movement at the port. Beverly's BMW pulled into the lot, followed by a truck carrying my car. Under floodlights, workers positioned it before a Massive container stamped BVLG 2024. Agent Taylor's whisper cut through the static. We hold until they start loading. That's the difference between conspiracy and trafficking. Through the lens, I saw Beverly barking orders, clipboard in hand, her hair catching the harsh white glow. The same woman who'd once argued about lawn height was now orchestrating international theft. But just as the lift began lowering toward the Shelby, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered with shaking hands. I hope you're enjoying the show, Ethan. Harold's voice was smooth, almost amused. But before you get too righteous, you should know, your father wasn't the hero you think he was. My pulse spiked. What are you talking about? Those reports he filed? They weren't about safety. They were about covering his mistakes. He was planning to disappear with a payout, leave you and your mother holding the bag. He wasn't. A whistleblower, Ethan. He was just like me, only worse, because he failed. The world tilted. Dad, a fraud? No. Impossible. But Harold's voice was confident, dripping poison into my ear. Agent Taylor gripped my shoulder. Don't listen. He's manipulating you. But doubt is a quiet thief. And Harold had planted it perfectly. As the workers prepared to lift the Shelby into the container, I felt the weight of two wars pressing on me, one against Beverly and Harold, and one against the possibility that my father's legacy wasn't what I believed. Taylor's voice cut sharp. Stand by. We're almost there. And I realized the truth might destroy me before Harold ever could. At 5:47 a.m., the world split open. Agent Taylor's voice cracked over the radio, sharp as glass. Go! 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 Suddenly, the quiet shadows around the port erupted. Federal agents poured from vans. Local police cruisers flared their lights. Port security locked down gates. And I, frozen in place, watched the chaos unfold like a scene from a movie. Except this time it wasn't fiction. My father's car was the centerpiece of a federal raid. Beverly Lang was caught mid-command, clipboard raised, mouth open in some furious order. The workers froze, hands still gripping the lift that cradled my Shelby, and then the flood of uniforms swallowed everything. Federal agents! Step away from the vehicle! The noise was deafening. Boots on concrete, radios squawking, shouts ricocheting between steel containers. And there she was, Beverly, the same woman who had once paced across my driveway with a ruler to measure grass height. Now she collapsed onto her knees on the cold dock, tears streaking her face, babbling like a child. I didn't want to do this. Harold made me. You don't understand. He has files, recordings. He controls everything. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity and justice don't share the same space. Agents pried open the container marked BVLG 2024, and inside was a sight that made my throat close. Not just my Shelby, wrapped like merchandise, but dozens of treasures from lives dismantled. Mrs. Patterson's Steinway piano padded and crated for shipment. Marcus's Harley Davidson, strapped with precision. Even a collection of rare watches, neatly cataloged like items in a museum. This isn't just theft, Agent Taylor murmured, her camera flashing. This is cultural trafficking. They're stripping neighborhoods of their history. Beverly's sobs echoed across the dock as she confessed, the words spilling faster than the agents could write them. Harold Green's name threaded through every sentence. He was the mastermind, the planner, the man with political reach and the patience to weave HOA power into a criminal empire. The floodlights cut through the dawn, and in that stark glow, Beverly looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not the tyrant of the cul-de-sac. Just another pawn who'd gambled and lost. But Harold was different. He arrived minutes later, stepping from a sleek black sedan with the calm of a man who still believed he owned the room. Even surrounded by flashing lights, his suit crisp and his smile measured, Harold radiated confidence. He thought his power would shield him. Agent Taylor met him halfway across the parking lot. Their conversation was too far for me to hear, but I saw the shift in his posture when she showed him photos from inside the container. His shoulders slumped. His lawyer's face cracked, and when she handed him the federal warrant, the mask slipped. Still, Harold kept his composure. Even as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he turned his gaze toward me. "Mr. Miller," Taylor called, motioning me forward. "He's requested to speak with you privately. You're not obligated." But I walked toward him anyway. Up close, Harold looked ordinary. A 60-year-old businessman in an expensive suit. But his eyes were ice. "Your father," he said softly, "was no saint. He tried to blackmail me with those reports. He wanted money, Ethan, just like me. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The words cut deep. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then Taylor stepped in, voice sharp. "Mr. Green, you have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." But Harold wasn't finished. He twisted back toward me, a cruel smile on his lips. "Ask your sister about the safety deposit box. Ask her what your father left behind." The agents pulled him away, and yet his voice stuck, splintered in my head like glass. The ride home was quiet. Emily stared out the window, pale, her hand trembling against her notebook. "Ethan, there is a safety deposit box. I found a key in Dad's things years ago. I never knew what it opened." The implication hung heavy in the air. If Harold was lying, he was playing the long con. But if he was telling the truth, then everything I thought I knew about my father was about to collapse. That night, Beverly's name exploded online. Someone leaked footage of her collapse at the port. The HOA president, who had once live-streamed block meetings about recycling bins, was now live-streaming her own downfall, sobbing, confessing, begging agents to believe she was only a victim. The internet tore her apart. Comment sections filled with merciless jokes. Karen.exe has stopped working. "Lady, you confessed on live TV?" It was almost funny. Almost. Except for the fact that the wreckage she left behind wasn't a meme. It was real lives, real families, real memories she'd sold like stock options. But Harold was the real storm. His arrest had triggered raids in 15 other neighborhoods. His empire stretched farther than anyone had guessed, and every news report added another layer of weight on my chest, because through it all, his words haunted me. "Your father was just like me." Emily set the key on the table that night, her face unreadable. A small, tarnished piece of metal, the answer to 30 years of questions. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "we open it." I stared at that key until my vision blurred, the hum of the Shelby's engine still alive in my ears from memory. What would we find in that box? Proof of Dad's integrity? Or evidence that Harold's poison was the truth? For the first time since Beverly screamed across my driveway, I felt afraid of the answer. The key sat on the table all night, small and harmless, yet heavier than anything I'd ever lifted. By dawn, Emily was already dressed, her briefcase in one hand, the key in the other. "Are you ready?" she asked. I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. The bank was quiet when we arrived. Sterile white walls, the faint smell of paper and polish. A manager led us into a small room with a steel door and 2 chairs. When the box slid across the table, my pulse felt like it might split my chest open. Emily's hand shook as she inserted the key. A click. The lid lifted. Inside were 2 things. First, a cassette tape, its label handwritten in Dad's steady script. Harold, 1995. Second, a letter. Addressed not to anyone official, but to us. Emily unfolded it, her voice trembling as she read. "If you're seeing this, it means Harold finally got to me. He threatened me, and he's not bluffing. He's dangerous. And he'll stop at nothing to protect himself. But you need to know, I never planned to disappear. I never planned to betray you. I filed those safety reports because it was the right thing to do. If he says otherwise, he's lying. I chose truth over safety, even if it cost me my life. My throat burned. Emily pressed play on the tape. The hiss of old audio filled the room. Then, unmistakable, Harold's voice. If you think you can destroy my career with your self-righteous whistleblowing, you're making a very dangerous mistake. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. The proof was there. Dad hadn't been corrupt. He hadn't been Harold. He'd been trying to stop Harold, and Harold had silenced him. For years, I'd carried the weight of unfinished work, rebuilding a car to fill the hole he left. Now I realized he hadn't just left me a car. He'd left me a war. Agent Taylor nearly dropped her pen when Emily handed her the tape that afternoon. "This is enough to bury him," she said, eyes gleaming. "Harold thought he was untouchable, but this is 30 years of rot exposed in his own voice." But Beverly was unraveling faster than Harold. From her holding cell, she was still trying to live-stream her innocence to the world. This time, the video cut in and out, her voice garbled like static. "My dear friends, I want you to know Izzut innocent. Harold is the real," before dissolving into glitchy sound. The comments tore her apart. "Karen wants to speak to the federal manager. Ma'am, this is a Wendy's. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so tragic." She was the face of betrayal and cowardice, but she was also proof of how Harold operated. Control through fear, pressure, blackmail, and his network was wider than anyone guessed. Taylor's team raided offices tied to Harold. What they found wasn't just incriminating, it was monstrous. Files, spreadsheets, psychological profiles of residents across 15 communities. He'd mapped people like chess pieces, identifying debts, secrets, weak spots. Each folder was a life dissected and tagged. "He didn't just steal property," Taylor muttered, flipping through the pages. "He stole dignity. He used fear, like a currency." That night, I sat in the garage staring at empty space. The Shelby was back under federal protection, evidence in the case. But without it sitting there, the garage felt hollow. Like the car had been carrying more than steel. It had been carrying Dad. Emily sat beside me quiet. Then, softly, "You know, I used to think fighting Beverly was about pride, about proving you weren't the neighborhood screw-up with greasy hands, but it's bigger, isn't it?" I nodded. "It's about Dad, about the kind of man he was, about making sure Harold doesn't win again." Her smile was tired, but fierce. "Then we finish this, for him." The next morning, Marcus joined us for surveillance at the port again. His old PI instincts were razor-sharp. Through the lens, we watched as Beverly, pale, frantic, met with agents, giving statement after statement. She named names, detailed shipments, described Harold's empire like she'd been rehearsing the lines for years. "He kept files on everyone," she told them, sobbing. "Affairs, debts, secrets. That's how he controlled us." Her words cracked something inside me, because I realized Harold's real power wasn't in cars or pianos, or even money. It was in making people believe resistance was pointless, and for 30 years maybe it had been, but not anymore. Because tomorrow, Agent Taylor said, was the final step. The Shelby was scheduled to be loaded onto an international ship at dawn. The plan was to let Harold's men make their move, document the act of trafficking, and close the net. It would be dangerous, messy, and there was no guarantee Harold wouldn't find another way to twist the knife before the end. But as I lay awake that night, Dad's words from the letter replayed in my head. I chose truth over safety, even if it cost me my life. For 30 years, Harold Green had been writing his story in lies and intimidation. Tomorrow, we'd write the ending. The night before the raid stretched like a lifetime. Marcus brewed coffee strong enough to peel paint. Emily sat hunched over her laptop, cross-referencing Harold's financial records, and I restless, kept replaying the cassette in my head. Harold's voice threatening Dad, that hiss of old tape, that warning. Accidents happen. But Dawn didn't wait. By 3 a.m., we were back at the port, tucked into shadows with Marcus's long lens trained on the loading bay. Floodlights cast sharp, white beams over the asphalt, painting every figure in stark relief. At 3:12, Beverly's BMW rolled in. She stepped out, hair disheveled, desperation replacing her usual poise. Behind her, the truck carrying my Shelby growled through the gates. My hands clenched into fists. 2 years of work, 30 years of history. And there it was again. Treated. Like cargo. Easy, Marcus whispered, adjusting the lens. We need them to commit before Taylor moves. Through the scope, I watched Beverly direct workers toward a massive container stenciled BVLG 2024. She waved her clipboard like a conductor leading an orchestra of thieves. Agent Taylor's voice crackled over the radio. Hold positions. We need visual confirmation of loading. The lift rumbled, the Shelby inching upward. My chest tightened. Every bolt, every panel I'd restored with Dad's ghost whispering over my shoulder, now suspended over an abyss. And then my phone rang. The number was unknown. I stepped back, away from Marcus and Emily, and answered. Enjoying the show, Ethan? Harold's voice was silk, poisoned silk. Calm, confident. You really should thank me. Without me, you'd never know the truth about your father. My throat went dry. You killed him. A pause. Then that laugh. Low, deliberate. Your father killed himself. He thought he could play hero, but he was planning to cash out. Those reports? They weren't for the FAA. They were leverage. He was going to walk away rich, leave you and your mother with nothing but excuses. Liar. Think about it, Harold pressed. Why do you think he kept that deposit box hidden? Why not go to the authorities? Because he wasn't building a case. He was building blackmail, just like me. His words hit like hammer blows. For 30 years, I'd held on to Dad as a symbol of truth. And now Harold was trying to twist him into a mirror. Behind me, Emily's voice cracked. Ethan, don't. Listen, he's manipulating you. But the seed was planted. The workers pushed the Shelby closer to the container. Every squeal of the lift's hydraulics felt like a countdown. Agent Taylor's whisper, Stand by. We move in 30 seconds. Harold's voice dropped to a hiss. Ask your sister about the things she's not telling you. About the deals your father made. You think you're different from him? You're just like him, chasing machines, hiding from the truth. Enough, I shouted, my voice echoing in the dark. Emily grabbed my arm. Ethan, he's baiting you. He wants you to break before we take him down. Don't give him that. But doubt is a poison that doesn't need proof. It just needs to fester. The lift jolted. The Shelby's wheels touched the edge of the container ramp. Agent Taylor's voice snapped like thunder. Go, go, go! Floodlights blazed. Agents surged. Forward from all sides. The air exploded with shouts and sirens. Workers scattered. Beverly froze, caught mid-step, clipboard in hand like a child clutching a broken toy. I pushed forward, unable to stop myself, my eyes locked on the Shelby teetering above the container. For a split second, it felt like I was 15 again, watching Dad's car vanish behind a tow truck after his death. But this time, I wouldn't let it disappear. Taylor's agents swarmed, pinning workers against steel crates, snapping cuffs onto wrists. Beverly dropped to her knees, sobbing. I didn't want this. Harold made me. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't help. Her voice cracked into the night, pathetic and small, and then, through the chaos, I saw him. Harold Green. He stepped from the shadows as if he owned the scene. Calm, polished. Even in cuffs, he radiated control. His lawyer trailed behind, barking about due process. But Harold's eyes, cold, sharp, never left me. As agents pulled him forward, he smiled. That same poisonous smile. "Your father wasn't a hero, Ethan," he murmured. "He was me before. Me. And one day you'll realize the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The words sank like knives, and though Agent Taylor shoved him into a waiting car, his voice clung to me like tar. On the dock, the Shelby finally touched solid ground again. Safe. Saved. But as I ran my hand over the cool metal, relief didn't come, because Harold's poison had worked. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I knew my father at all. The raid was over. But peace didn't come. Beverly sat sobbing on the dock, her mascara smeared into dark rivers, her once perfect composure shattered. The clipboard she'd wielded like a weapon was now evidence bagged and tagged. Her voice cracked as she begged the agents, "I cooperated! You saw me! I told you everything about Harold! Please, you don't understand. He has files on all of us. He controls everything." No one listened. For once, Beverly's words carried no power. Harold, though, Harold still tried to play the part, even in handcuffs, even with the raid. Collapsing his empire in real time, he carried himself like a man convinced the world would bend before him. He leaned toward me as agents escorted him past. His voice was soft enough only I could hear. "Your father planned to blackmail me. Ethan, he wasn't the saint you want him to be. He just failed where I succeeded." Agent Taylor shoved him forward, but his last words clawed into me. "Ask your sister about the safety deposit box." That night, Emily finally unlocked it. Inside, we found the letter we had already read and the cassette tape with Harold's threats. But what Harold hadn't counted on was the second envelope, tucked beneath. Dad's handwriting again. "If something happens to me, I want you to know the truth. I am not running. I am not blackmailing. I am standing. Harold Green has silenced safety reports, endangered lives, and now he has threatened mine. If I die, it will not be an accident. It will be because I refused to stay silent." Emily's hands shook as she read aloud. The words were simple, honest. They cut through Harold's lies like sunlight through fog. And for the first time in days, my chest loosened. Dad hadn't been Harold. He hadn't been broken. He'd been what I always believed, a man who chose truth over safety. A man who paid the price for integrity. When we turned the cassette tape back on, Harold's voice filled the room. "Accidents happen to people who don't know when to keep their mouths shut." And then Dad's voice, steady, recorded like he knew. "The day would come. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. But Ethan, Emily, don't let him win. Don't let him take what isn't his." I didn't realize I was crying until Emily pressed her hand over mine. The next days blurred into headlines. Federal agents uncover multi-state HOA theft ring, city council chairman arrested for racketeering, and trafficking. Neighborhood HOA president streams confession to thousands. Beverly's name became a joke on the internet. Memes, parodies, hashtags. Her desperate live streams had gone viral, her collapse immortalized in digital ink. But beneath the mockery was the wreckage she'd left behind. Families robbed of memories, communities stripped of dignity. She faced 7 years in federal prison. Harold, though, faced life. During his formal interrogation, Agent Taylor laid the cassette tape on the table. The color drained from Harold's face as Dad's recording played. His lawyer blustered, demanded it be dismissed, but the words were undeniable. Harold's composure cracked. For the first time, the mask slipped, and the man who had terrorized 15 neighborhoods broke down sobbing in a federal room. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," he stammered. "It started small. Just a few things here and there. People wouldn't miss them. But then it grew. I couldn't stop. The same man who once threatened my father now begged for mercy. But mercy was never his to claim. The aftermath reshaped everything. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now stood side by side at community meetings, demanding change. The HOA, once Beverly's kingdom, dissolved into a neighborhood council led by Marcus. His first rule was simple: no one person will ever hold this much power again. Emily passed the bar and started her own practice, specializing in property rights. Her first client was Mrs. Patterson, who sued Harold's estate for emotional distress and used the settlement to fund a foundation for elderly fraud victims. Marcus opened a consulting firm, teaching other neighborhoods how to dismantle corrupt HOAs. Jake Thompson launched a security business, protecting collectors from the very kind of schemes Harold had perfected. And the Shelby? She came home. When the garage door lifted again that morning, sunlight spilled across her chrome just as it had. The day Beverly screamed theft. But this time the air wasn't tense with accusation. It was filled with triumph. I finished the restoration exactly as Dad had planned, following his sketches, his notes, his fingerprints in grease-stained margins. On the dashboard I mounted a brass plaque, in memory of David Miller, a man who chose truth over safety. 1 year later, Eleanor wasn't just my car. She was our community's symbol. At car shows, neighbors gathered not just to admire her lines, but to remember what we'd fought for. Each purr of her engine was more than horsepower. It was legacy. And with restitution funds and donations, I opened the David Miller Technical Training Center, a non-profit teaching automotive and aerospace skills to kids who never had the chances. I did. The first class graduated 12 students, each carrying not just tools, but pride. Dad's real legacy wasn't steel, it was integrity, passed forward in hands that refused to quit. Sometimes when I lock the garage at night, I still hear Harold's voice, his poison, his lies. But then I hear Dad's recording, clear and steady. Don't let him win. And I know we didn't. The truth cost 30 years. It cost Dad his life. But it came. It always comes. Standing in that garage, hand on the Shelbys. Hood, I asked myself the question that started it all. What would you do if your neighbor called 911 claiming you stole your own car? Would you fight? Would you fold? Would you believe the lies whispered about those you loved most? For me, there was only one answer. You fight. Because sometimes justice doesn't come fast. But it always comes if you're willing to stand and... When it does, it sounds a lot like a Shelby engine roaring back to life. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.